Welcome to episode 51 of Communicast, a communication skills podcast. I'm Scott D'Amico, president of Communispond, a global communication skills training organization. Get out of the echo chamber. Solid leadership advice from my guest, Matthew Krayton. Matthew is the founder of Publitics, a public affairs, politics, PR, and strategy consultancy. In this episode, we discuss the importance of patience in communication, why empathy matters, and how the combination of the two will help you to avoid appearing tone deaf. I hope you enjoy. Matt, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me on.
Really looking forward to the conversation. Maybe just to get it kicked off, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about you, your career journey, and what it is that you're doing today?
Sure, absolutely. So I am founder and principal of a public affairs, public relations, and strategy consulting firm called Publitics. I started back in 2011, and my career journey is kind of a little bit of sort of a roundabout journey. However, I think it's fairly common, like millennial type thing that happens. So I went to college thinking, all right, I want to be a teacher. So I was headed for the classroom, did my undergrad in history, minor in political science, and then did my graduate degree in education. All while this was going on, though, the 2008 financial meltdown happened. Graduated 2 years later with my graduated undergrad 2 years later, and then in 2011. Graduated with a master's degree. So at that point, nothing, the sort of education sector had not yet recovered completely. Funding had still been cut and staffing levels were, so long story short, no jobs. So I was sort of thinking, oh man, what am I going to do? Like a lot of people in my position. And, just kind of took the first job that came my way, which happened to be fundraising at the university that I went to, which made for all sorts of interesting phone conversations. So my job was literally to call through lists of alumni just like me who are struggling to find jobs and ask them for money.
That's an easy sell.
Yeah, super easy. So as you can imagine, I've got a bunch of like sort of colorful responses from people, as you might imagine too, not the most fun thing to do. So I started to think, all right, what am I going to do with my life? Like I need to figure something else out. So I started Publitics as a solo act in 2011. No clients, no experience, no nothing. And I was like, all right, so what am I going to do? So I figured, let's get into political campaigns. So I started reaching out to a couple of campaigns, and my thought was, all right, well, if I pick a campaign that is almost sure to lose, I'm sure they'll have an easier time taking a chance on me, rather than one of the higher profile races. So I was like, all right, let's give this a try. So I was able to get myself in on a congressional race that year that was totally 100% sure to lose, and then a local race as well. The good thing about that was I was able to build up some skills, met a whole lot of people through those two things, ended up winning the local race, which was a little bit of a surprise. And sort of that kicked off the career from there and just kept networking. And today, so in 2014, brought on a partner, and we've been growing ever since. So we've expanded out of the political sphere and into doing corporate communications, stuff for nonprofits, branding, positioning. So it's definitely an interesting mix of things. But that's sort of my roundabout way from wanting to be a teacher, a classroom teacher, and then ending up doing this. So there's definitely some overlap too, which is cool.
Fascinating. Yeah. So I started my career as a classroom teacher. I was a high school social studies teacher, had my undergraduate degree in education with an emphasis in integrated social studies. So small world. I made it about 5 years before I realized, this is not going to be a 30-year career for me, and had some twists and turns along the way. But it sounds like a lot of what you did was really leverage your transferable skills, take some risks, and it seems like learned a lot along the way, right? Jumping into a role where you're just cold calling people asking for money, as painful as it is, I am sure that was a great learning opportunity. Just as if I look back on my time as a teacher, being a classroom teacher was probably, those 5 years was one of the best learning experiences for me with regards to communication skills, to developing relationships, understanding your audience, and even with sales, right? If you can quote sell supply and demand or diminishing returns or World War I to 14-year-olds, you can pretty much sell anything. So I just always love when I hear from folks that take advantage of these experiences that may not be directly related to what they want to do long term, but they learn from them and then take those into those new roles and grow. So that's outstanding.
Yeah, yeah. It's so a fellow traveler here. I'm with from the classroom to that, and it's funny because my business partner always kind of jokes with me. He's like, how do you have so much patience for like some of the more difficult personalities or challenging situations? And I'm like, yeah, it has to be that time that I did spend in the classroom, because you do practicums and student teaching and all of that. And you're right, like it's interesting when you talk to fellow educators. I don't know if you've found this yourself, but you talk to people who are looking to leave the classroom and they're like, oh, I don't know what I'm going to do because I don't know if I have any transferable skills. And I found like the exact opposite is true. It's like, to your point, you're standing in a room full of 14-year-olds or whatever age you're teaching. There are 30 different kids in there with different backgrounds, different stories, different sort of emotional approaches that they're bringing into the classroom with you. And you have to figure out, like, as you're standing up there, like, how do I talk to each of these 30 kids while also kind of keeping things on track and staying on message for all intents and purposes. And, how do you deal with the curveballs too? I mean, I think that's a huge thing. So I always say to people, like fellow educators or people who are in the classroom, like, honestly, like you are probably better equipped than a lot of others to make that transition into some other field, because it's extraordinarily difficult being an educator, especially today. I mean, I got out before it got really, really bad, but I mean, it's tough today. So I think it's definitely an interesting way forward. And then, to your point about making phone calls, that's, a whole other can of worms.
Yeah, definitely a lot of curveballs come at you when you are a classroom teacher. So being able to adapt and be flexible, fantastic skills. And yes, I've had a number of those conversations with people that are thinking of leaving education, and really encourage them to think about what are all the different things that you do on a day-to-day basis. How do those relate to the type of thing that you want to do moving forward? I'm willing to bet there are a lot of them. It's just finding the best way to communicate that to a prospective employer.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And it's not easy because it doesn't, seem natural, because I think we're all kind of like set up to think very literally about the, the resume that you put together. So, you look at this piece of paper that has, taught for however many years and, had this other experience, maybe summer positions doing other things, and education. And that's sort of like, it's a little bit of a cage, right? It kind of keeps you, caged up and boxed in a little bit. But yeah, I'm a huge proponent of just thinking about those transferable skills. And I didn't even realize it. And it was funny until my partner, again, my business partner, brought it up. He's like, you really, like, it's got to be the education stuff. And like, maybe it really, and thinking back on it, it probably is.
Absolutely. Matt, as you think through your experience, and I would imagine both from the political side and now the side that you're working in now, working with nonprofits and corporate communications, you've probably come across a lot of great communicators. So from your perspective, when you hear somebody is a great communicator, or they're a really strong communicator, what's the vision that comes to mind? What are you picturing when you hear that?
That's a really interesting question, because in my mind, I think there are different ways. People are great communicators in different ways. Especially in the political sphere too, much like a classroom, right? Like, so, as you run across people running for office for various positions, everyone's bringing their own style, their own personality to the table. So it's not like we're kind of sitting here sketching out, like, 3D printing a perfect candidate, right? I mean, like, as much as we'd all love to, or a perfect executive, right? Perfect CEO in terms of from a communications perspective. So In my mind, it's different things. So I would say the one big thing is a great communicator really understands what their strengths are and understands what they're bringing to the table, and then being able to channel whatever message they need to deliver through the lens of authenticity. They're what's authentic to them, and I think that is the biggest thing that we oftentimes miss, because it's funny. Like we think a lot. Especially in the political space, and even like the way politics are covered, we think a lot about what is being said, which is important, but it's not everything. It's also how you say it too. So you could have the same concept or policy prescription, and you could say it 5 different ways, and one of those ways may catch fire and resonate with people. But I think that, being able to, again, to authentically sort of channel your own personal approach, personality, and then understand where your weaknesses are too, and not to avoid those, but to just be cognizant of it and figure out how to work that into your communication style as well. So, and then again, the actual act of communicating could take many different forms. I mean, some people are just naturally very funny and can do humor. Some people can't, but can do a really good job of just explaining things in a way that makes a lot of sense to their audience. So to me, it's a bunch of different things, but authenticity is number one, and the second too is the second thing I think is having some sense of empathy. I think, or understanding how to channel other people's emotions, right? And you see that again that a lot in politics. Like people look to their leaders to channel the things that they're feeling about a particular issue. So being able to tap into that however they do it. And again, like when I say empathy, like there's some CEOs, leaders, politicians, public figures that are really good at communicating empathy, like in the traditional sense that we think it. And then there's also like just having empathy and understanding people, right? And maybe you're not the person that can do the I feel your pain type routine, but you can still have some sense of like how people are feeling. So I'd say those are the 2 big things.
That makes complete sense. And especially with the authenticity part of it, because as you mentioned, there are all different types of great communicators. There's the kind of rah halftime speech, people that are going to get folks, really excited about something just through their energy and their charisma. There's other people that are much more soft-spoken and deliberate with their communications, and it's really effective. Now, I think what happens sometimes is people try to mimic what they see, and it's not true to who they are. And when they do that, it oftentimes does not come off as authentic, and it ultimately hurts their credibility and detracts from their message. So I do think it's important for people to understand really what's my innate natural communication style. And, I can stray from it a little bit, but if I'm kind of that quiet, soft-spoken, deliberate communicator, and I try to give a super rousing, exciteful, I'm just shouting into the microphone type of speech to my staff or whatever it is, it's likely not going to work. And same thing with humor, right? If you are somebody that's consistently, you have a great sense of humor, can make people laugh, engage an audience, awesome. But if you're not, a lot of times humor goes very, very poorly when people try that. Either just it's not funny, or they end up saying something inappropriate because they're just not used to it. So I do think being true to yourself and just finding what's going to work is really important.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I think like on the humor side, right, it's a really good example. Like if you think that you can't commit to a joke, it's not gonna come off right. And so if you're just not comfortable with it, or it's just not you, that's okay. Like you can live in that world where you don't have to be the funny one. You could be, again, the empathetic one. You can be the matter of fact one. There are a million ways that you can present the information, but I think you're 100% right. Like if you can't lean into what you're good at, then it's not going to come off. And that doesn't mean you can't learn new skills either. I mean, you can learn to use humor, sometimes, but it's harder for some people than others. And I use humor as an example, but you can almost apply that to any communication skill.
Matt, as you think of the workplace today, and whether it's the work that you're doing within your company and in your folks, or as you're going out and working with some of these nonprofits or corporate clients on their communication strategies, Really, what are some of the skills that you think are critical, mission critical for employees to have or to bring to the table today in a workplace?
That's a really good question, and actually, interestingly enough, something I've been thinking a lot about is not necessarily the communication skills that employees need to bring to the table, and that's something that definitely like crosses my mind. But the leaders within those organizations need to bring to the table, and I can get into the employee side, but the thing that I've kind of noticed is this sort of spate of very tone deaf communication as we're all trying to navigate a really unprecedented situation with the COVID-19 pandemic, right? So that upended almost everything in our lives, including how we work. I mean, that's no secret, right? There, many of your listeners probably transition to some kind of hybrid or work from home thing, or maybe or even experiencing that a workplace that wants folks back in the office. And the thing that I am continually shocked at are these like videos of these executives that continue to pop up where it's like, get back in the office, and it's like super tone. It's like, and I'm going to highlight the one that really sticks in my mind. I don't remember exactly who it was, but there was like this, they highlighted an employee who gave up the family dog, essentially. It's like, I'm giving, and that was like a virtuous thing, dude. Gave up the dog for the company. And it's like, you have to realize that like not everyone feels that way. So like as a leader, like this is something that I think a lot about too. It's like, this is my organization, right? I'm captain of this ship here, and I think about this differently than our employees do. Yes, I want them to be invested, but you also like have to take that an additional responsibility and be reflective of like, why do I care about this so much? And it's like, well, it's because it's mine. Like I built it. So I think that's missing a little bit. And it kind of goes back to like empathy. Just a little bit of empathy goes a long way. So I do wonder why that happens, right? Why you have these sort of videos going viral. I mean, just to kind of go back to a school example too. Like the schools have been incredibly challenging places to be as educators during the pandemic, and I've seen some like crazy. I mean, I have friends and family who are in education. You see these crazy emails that administration will send, and it's not like, I understand that this has been a difficult situation. We're, all in this together. I understand this, that you may be having individual challenges as you try to navigate this sort of new normal that we have. But I want you to know that my door is open. I'm here to help in whatever way you can, right? That would make sense to me. That's like how even if you can't actually do anything, because like in the context of a school, there's only so much that you can do. There's only so much budget that's allocated every year. There are only so many people that you can hire. And sometimes you can't hire enough people, which is part of the issue now. So like, I get it. Like you can't actually do certain things, but you can talk to people like they're human beings. But instead, what you see a lot is like, knuckle up. I know this has been difficult, but just like suck it up and deal with it. And it's like, how that doesn't serve anyone, right? So those are the things that I've been thinking a lot about, is like taking that step back and saying like, okay, like how can I make the people who are on my team feel valued? How can I communicate that I am there for them? How can I try to, even if I'm not like living through their experience specifically, like, how can I understand that, at least from an intellectual level, and just know that it's hard for them, and then communicate in that way. So I think those are very important skills. For employees, like all of those things apply too. But again, they don't have that responsibility to, they don't have that responsibility that someone who's in charge of an organization has, and nor should they, right? And maybe at some point they will, and they'll find themselves in that position, and then they can take those lessons. But I think like that's the big thing in workplaces that I've kind of been seeing is this sort of lack of empathy or tone deafness that happens, which again, I'm not sure where it comes from, but it does warrant kind of a step back to say, okay, like how can I make people feel like they're a part of this with me?
Yeah, that is kind of funny. I remember the video that you were talking about, seeing that, and then a whole slew of other ones where people getting laid off through Zoom, and the executive just making it all about them and being very crass with it and just really not caring. So I think the tone deafness comes from the lack of empathy. The lack of empathy likely comes from partially just one, it may be who they are, but also perhaps leaders surrounding themselves with people just like them. So they have an echo chamber. They don't really have somebody that's willing or comfortable to step up and say, you know what, maybe we might want to rethink this message. And when it comes to communication, to avoid this being tone deaf and really hurting your people is focus on the audience. So much of this is I need to understand my audience, not just the details and logistics of it. Okay, well, so much of this audience is going to be teachers, so much of this is going to be administrators, whatever it's going to be, or it's going to be parents. That's one minor layer of understanding your audience, but starting to think about what are going to be their concerns. How might they react to this message? That's something I always encourage people to do. When you're sending out a message, especially if it's going out to a large audience, before you send it, and honestly, really before you even start writing it, say, based on this topic, what are going to be some of the concerns, pushback, rejections, objections that we might find out, and really start to go from there. So I think as people really drill down, double down on understanding their audience, they will see hopefully a decrease in the sentiment that their message was tone deaf.
Yeah, that's 100% right. I totally, and like, as you're saying that, I think a little bit about too, like my experience in the political sphere. And I do think there's this element too of I paid my dues, right? I came up the hard way and like nobody helped me and all of that stuff. And and honestly, executives in a lot of positions kind of get into that echo chamber, like you said, which is like, I think one of the biggest things you have to do is like get out of the echo chamber, have a fresh set of eyes and ears on everything that you do. And then be coachable ultimately in that way. But like, there's this like sense of like, I paid my dues, I clawed my way up. Nobody helped me. I did this all on my own. And it's like, well, did you though? I mean, everyone has help, right? Like, and I would, yes, I started my own firm. But if I were to tell you right now with a straight face that I had no help whatsoever from a mentor or someone who, picked me up when I was down a little bit or who, pointed me in the right direction, that would be insane for me to tell you that none of that ever happened, right? I had plenty of help coming up, and you remember how stressful that was and still is in some ways, but stressful like in the sort of building phase. So just, you got to remember that too. It's like you didn't come from nowhere. Like there were a whole bunch of people, mentors, family, friends, advisors, investors, whoever it is, who were there to help you and speak to you in a way that was empathetic. That's okay. I see that you're struggling with this. So how can we help you here? So I think this idea of like, oh, I paid my dues, like we like to erase all the hard stuff, you know what I mean, from our past. And I don't think people are actually comfortable with talking about struggle, which I do actually find when you do talk about struggle, especially with your own team, and you're trying to foster an environment that promotes folks asking you to help, like being open about that, which I think is a very important thing, or seeking assistance in some way or seeking improvement. Speaking about those struggles is actually a very powerful communication tool, I find. And you can do it in a way that doesn't weaken you, because I think that's the concern, that like, well, if I say that I struggled, or I say that, I didn't go through some difficult times or didn't make some pretty ridiculous mistakes over the course of my career, then, you're weak, you're incompetent, you don't know what you're doing. But the opposite is actually true. I think people look at that and go, oh, well, that seems credible to me, actually, like that, that reflects some of my experience, in fact. So like, let's, have a conversation about how we can be a little bit better every day. So I think that's an important thing as well, thinking through these issues.
Yeah, sharing your struggles and just continuing to think about and own your struggles is one of the things that really does lead to empathy. Because while my struggle might not be exactly the same as yours, chances are there's some sort of parallel there that I can pull from that helps me to be a little bit more empathetic. And a big part of it is also as you communicate about struggles, either that you've had before in your career, or even maybe you're currently going to, it models that behavior for your team so that they feel more comfortable coming to you if they are struggling with something. So I'm very open and transparent with my team, right? We're very much a part of our culture is, family first, take care of yourself in order to take care of the business. So I will share that. I say, listen, I need to take time off this afternoon today because I'm taking my kids to the doctor's appointment, or they have this event, whatever it is going on. Or, we have a number of massive projects going on here at our company now that's taking just a lot of my time and focus and energy. So I'm transparent with the team that, listen, if I seem distant or I'm short or it's taking me longer to respond, here's what's going on. And so in the hopes that, one, I just want to be transparent so they know that. But then if they're facing things where they're behind on something or they need more assistance, that they do feel comfortable coming and sharing that, because it'll only help the business to operate better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think that's very important. And one thing that I've tried to do too is share a little bit about my own professional growth, right? So like starting this business in 2011, again, as a solo practitioner, that's a much different thing than having a team, even a small team, right? Completely different thing, because like all of the processes that lead to things getting done or decisions being made happened entirely between my own 2 years. And then you bring on a partner, which I'm extraordinarily fortunate that over the years we have, between the two of us, developed a way of communicating where we kind of just like know what to do, know which direction to go, and can work through issues. But I recognize that doesn't always translate for some of, sometimes our team. When I'm talking about our internal team, or if you're talking like a big political campaign, for example, which is like, building a team in a compressed timeline, and then you have to like make sure all the pieces are moving together, and then just add in as much stress as you possibly can. And then that's your campaign. So it's like a pressure cooker. So those experiences have been very helpful in that I try to share my management struggles as well. So like I try to be a little, and again, I'm not perfect, because like sometimes we all miss, right? Like everyone misses. And again, that's okay. But I try to say like, look, like I started this by myself, different experience. I am learning as I go along. I was not born a perfect manager. I was not born, a perfect executive. So those are things that I'm learning as I go. And I want you to be on that journey with me, as opposed to saying like, if an employee has a concern, like, oh, you didn't communicate your expectation clearly about something, or you didn't outline what outline clearly what you need on this project. I could say, of course I did. I know what I'm doing. I'm the boss. I know what I'm doing. I'm the manager, and then that's the end of it, right? But what does that do? That, to your point again, like shuts the conversation down with the employee. So then the employee, team member doesn't feel like they can come to you with concerns, and then I don't learn what I need to learn in order to better communicate next time. Because if I share that struggle, and then we both can kind of figure out, okay, like what is actually the best way forward here, next time it just becomes a whole lot easier to actually do the project or complete the task or manage the crisis that we're managing or whatever it is. So I try to openly discuss, the struggles or the learning process that goes along with trying to figure, because like providing the service to a client actually is also a much different thing than managing a team who is also providing a service to a client. So those are kind of some things that I've been trying to do, but I don't see a whole lot, especially like in the campaign space. Again, when you have that compressed timeline, the really effective campaigns do that, though. They figure out how to manage that while also having a clear process for making decisions, which I don't think it's a mutually exclusive thing. Having someone who's clearly in charge that can set the strategic direction, make the decisions, and then keep things moving, while also sharing some of the management learning and struggles that someone has. Like, I don't think those two things are mutually exclusive.
Definitely not. It's challenging, right? It's a fine line to walk, and it's this idea of, how do I play big and play small at the same time? It's kind of the way that I always think about it. Kind of focus on the big picture, the strategy, but then also kind of coming down a little bit closer to the ground and figuring out how do we keep things moving forward, operationalize things, and kind of keep everyone moving in the same direction. Matt, we've hit on a number of things already today, but if I were to go to someone close to you, maybe your partner, and ask them, what's the one communication skill that you would really point to that has helped Matt to get to where he is today? Founding this business, growing this business, running everything, keeping everything on track. What would that communication skill they would point to?
He'd probably say patience. Yeah, and I think, and that's sort of an underrated. Well, patience and conflict resolution, I think, are two things that he would say, and it's good, between the two of us that we have like a balance of traits that I think work really well. So I, over the years, have at points been less forceful on certain things, where maybe I could have been a little bit more forceful or assertive, and he kind of nudges me along in that direction. He's very good at that, actually, being very assertive and knowing when to use that approach. Whereas I'm a little bit on the other side of the spectrum, where I think conflict resolution and kind of understanding, or not even conflict resolution in some cases, because sometimes, like, just being totally honest, you can't resolve the conflict. It just is there for whatever reason, and you just need to manage it. So conflict management as well. And I think a lot of that is trying to avoid getting emotionally bogged down in conversations with colleagues or clients in some cases, or the client's team in some cases, where you just have a fundamental difference of opinion. And oftentimes, and again, this is something that we kind of like learned on the campaign trail that's helpful, is it can be emotionally fraught, because like you are in fact under fire sometimes from the opposition, right? People are saying things that aren't particularly nice or flattering about you constantly, and it's easy to react with that like sort of knee jerk, like, oh yeah, well, guess what? Yep. And then you go right back, and all of a sudden you're throwing punches at each other, not metaphorically speaking, and then you get nowhere, right? So I think the thing that I've what my partner would say, and like I try to bring to the table, is taking a step back, kind of trying to observe the situation, trying to understand the motivations of everyone involved, and then treating it like a negotiation as opposed to a bludgeon, right? Like, you can try, right? You can try, and sometimes there is a place for it. Sometimes there is a place for that sort of thing, but most of the time, in my view, I think everything can be a negotiation, and you can at least get to a place where you can manage a conflict to the point where it's not completely derailing everything that you're doing. So I would say those are the most successful skills, is really figuring out, again, like how to deal with people who, for whatever reason, have come to a situation where they're not happy, right? Like maybe someone feels like they should be in charge of something, but they weren't empowered to be in charge. And now there's like a lot of resentment and a lot of anger there. And it's like, how do you deal with that person? Or how do you deal with a person who just fundamentally disagrees with your viewpoint on something? So that happens not infrequently. I'm sure, a lot of practitioners in the communication space find that. Yeah.
I love that you brought up patience, because patience, I think, is something that a lot of people might not directly associate with a communication skill. But for me, it's a really important part of being an effective communicator for a number of the reasons you just mentioned. When you have patience, oftentimes you're not going to hit that knee-jerk reaction to when somebody says something, or an email comes in and you just immediately get upset and fire something back. That's probably not appropriate or the best way to have handled it. Or just even in general, if a crisis comes up, and some people just aren't patient and they want to try and attack it head on immediately versus stepping back, taking a breather, and really formulating the best response to it. So patience, in my opinion, is a big part of being an effective communicator. And Matt, as you think of your style, how you've developed this communication style over time, who has been somebody that has influenced that? Perhaps you've maybe taken one or two things from them, made it your own, but who's somebody that you would say has had a big influence on your communication style?
if I had to look back again, I go back to the classroom and some of the really good teachers that I have had, both as a student, but then also have had the opportunity to shadow along the way. So I would say that in terms of like a single, the single most influential, and it's a multitude of different people, I think. But I would say that teachers, in terms of just, again, negotiating simultaneously with like 30 very different personalities in a classroom, was hugely influential for me. And then also, I think just listening to storyteller, like people are really good storytellers, I think, and I wouldn't be able to say that there's any one particular person, but like just listening to people, like if you find, so one thing that I try to do is, like, if I find myself really interested in something, like I'm sitting there at, like, whether it's a podcast or a video on YouTube or some live thing, and someone's talking about something, and I find myself like, oh wow, this is really interesting. Like, I try to actually listen to it a second time and then ask myself, okay, why was that really interesting?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what part of this like drew me in? Was it the narrative arc that they were creating and oftentimes it was. And that's the thing, that I think has been very helpful too, is like listening to that and listening. So as you're like, I would say, like, for the audience, like, as you're listening to things and you find yourself really engaged with something, like, take a minute, like, listen to it through, and then go back and listen to it again and say, oh, why was that? Like, why was it that I was interested in this, or interested in a book, right? Like, how did they tell this story in a book in a way that was engaging to me? So I think that's another piece as well. So I would say classroom, and then also kind of taking note of things that are interesting. And again, things that are interesting to me may not be interesting to you or everyone else, but like, it does help kind of get a say, because it will be interesting to some subset of the population. If it's interesting to someone, I'm sure someone else out there has some thought in the same direction. So yeah.
Exactly. There's, even if the content that there's not interest in, as you mentioned, kind of the way they've structured their message, whether it is a book you're reading, a video you're watching, listening to a keynote, there's usually that big narrative. And then within the narrative, they have their various building blocks to kind of roll back up to that. And then they have smaller stories that associate with that. So when you see that, it makes perfect sense, right? I see something that's really interesting to me, go back, dissect it a little bit, and figure out what's the structure that they use to get there. Because you can then take and overlay that structure really to any type of message or communication that you have.
100%, and understanding that emotional journey too, because again, like, as you're engaged, you're also experiencing some kind of emotion as well, and that's probably why you're engaged in those situations, right? Like, some of the best sales pitches that you see sort of have that common structure of, like, do you feel, whichever way, do you feel overwhelmed and you want to grow your business, and you've envisioned the problem and then sort of the solution? It's like a roller coaster, right? They take you on the journey with them. So understanding what emotions are going into listening to these sorts of things, and like, why am I feeling hopeful after I listen to this, or why do I feel inspired after listening to this? So yeah, that's 100% correct.
As we're wrapping up here, Matt, what piece of advice would you have out there to the listeners, really regardless of where they are in their career journey? Just piece of advice for them around communication skills and the role that they can ultimately play in their career success.
That is the communication is one of the most important tools that you can bring to the table, and I'm not sure that it's emphasized nearly enough on whether you're going through your educational experience in college or some other or high school or other secondary type education, or post high school education, is we focus on hard skills, right? Can you do this accounting problem, or can you recall this case law if you're going to law school, or can you do this proof if you're going into sort of geometry or some other field like that, mathematical field. But communication is like often under, like, if you just have all these other skills, then you don't need to communicate, right? But that's not true. And I think so, just focusing on how you're interacting with people, and then also noticing how people are responding to you. So are you wondering, okay, why is this person that I'm talking to, even on a one-on-one, right? So like there are these one-on-one interactions, and then you have the, group interact. Like if I'm standing up on a stage and there's 300 people in the audience, and you can kind of get a vibe that way as well. Why are these people or is this person not reacting the way that I think they should be reacting to what I'm saying? Is it what I'm saying? Is it how I'm saying it? Is it my body language? Is it any of those things? So I think just noticing a lot of things, being more observant and present in the moment is very helpful. And it's hard to do because there's so much stuff that we can pay attention to in any given moment. I mean, I can grab my phone, scroll on there infinitely, watch Netflix at the same time, look at the billboard, down the street while I'm all trying to like communicate with you or type an email out or something like, or speak with you directly. But I would say just noticing the things around you, noticing the feedback, kind of understanding how people are reacting. And from that sort of data, you can start to develop a sense of, okay, I said this, I think it's correct, but the audience they're not buying it. Whether, again, it's a single person or a room full of 300 people, or, even if you're just like doing advertising or something like that, they're just not buying it. Like, why? Why are they not buying this? Is it the idea, or is it how I communicated it, or like what's happening? So kind of just like going through those paces and just don't stop doing it, right? Continue to do your reps. So that would be my advice.
I was just going to say, communication comes down to really getting the reps in. Just like if you're trying to learn a sport, great to have a coach. Obviously, you need to understand the correct way to do things. But beyond that, you have to get the reps. You have to put in the practice, whether it's one-on-one conversations, Zoom meetings, keynotes, you're out with friends, you're at a restaurant, whatever it is, put in the reps, be present so that you can really see what's going on, and then ultimately adjust to how people are reacting to you. I think if you do those three things, you'll be well on your way to growing these skills that are going to play such a critical role in your career outcomes.
100%.
Matt, thank you so much for joining me today. Really enjoyed the conversation. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Scott. You as well.
Take care. A special thank you again to my guest, Matthew Krayton. His take on understanding your strengths and what you bring to the table with regard to being authentic is so important. If you try to be someone you are not, or stretch too far away from your true self, you will likely come off as disingenuous, and you risk having your message fall flat. As always, if you're looking to improve your communication skills, be sure to subscribe to Communicast so that you can continue to learn from my guests with each new episode. And if you have found value in the show, leaving us a rating or review would be appreciated. Thanks, and have a great day.